You are Locked On Wolves POSTCAST, part of Locked On Minnesota on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Woof. T-Wolves buckle in the second half. They get outscored in the second half by 30. They collapse to OKC in game one. 114-88. That's your final. What's going on? Back in the lab, back at it. Another T-Wolves postcast episode right here on the Locked On Sports Minnesota Network. Your team every day. Jack Borman with me as always. Give him a follow at grborman13. Listen, Jack, we're going to get on here for the next 30, 40 minutes and talk about a lot of not great stuff that happened for the Wolves tonight. The bench was atrocious, the second half meltdown, et cetera, et cetera. Can you just do me a favor just to start things off? Find me a positive, some sort of positive we can take away and try to hold on to, something that says, hey, if this part of the game keeps up like it did tonight, you maybe actually like the Wolves' chances to still take this series.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely, I can. And I'll start with corner threes. Oklahoma City, for the majority of the season, gave up as many corner threes as any team in the league. And tonight, the Wolves they got up 21 corner threes. So 21 of their 83 shots were corner threes. That's a 25% frequency. The Wolves made only 5 of them. That's a horrible percentage, just 24%, well below the 37% they've shot in the postseason and the 40-ish% they shot in the regular season. And that was a huge reason why Denver lost against OKC. I mean, they shot 89 corner threes across those 7 games. And even that's a pretty good frequency, shooting about 10 a game from the corners. And so they shot just 26%. That's a big reason why they lost. But I'm telling, if the Wolves take 21 corner threes a game, that's a great number for them. For reference, in the postseason at large right now, NBA teams are averaging a corner 3 attempt rate. So about 11% of a team's total shots come from the corners. The Wolves were at 25, so more than twice the league average. And I know you're going to say, oh, okay, yeah, you got to knock down the shots. But I'm telling you, like Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Dante DiVincenzo, Mike Conley, Naz Reid, all of those guys were tremendous corner shooters all season long. And they just haven't been able to find it consistently in the postseason. And this is a very different ball game if the Wolves make 3 or 4 more of those shots and shoot more on par with what their season-long percentages were. I mean, we can talk all we want to about just how horribly they played offensively in the second half. But I think if you can try to replicate what they did offensively in the first half, create as many corner threes as they did. I think they created 13 in the first half. That's tremendous. And I really hope that Naz and Dante and Nickeil all continue to shoot, and Mike all continue to shoot those shots, because and it's very clear to me that Chris Finch told all those guys, keep shooting those shots, because those shots are going to come. I trust in that. I trust in some progression to the mean, and I think that the offensive process, for the most part, especially in that first half, I thought was really strong.
Jack, that's why they pay you the big bucks. I already feel better. All right. Wolves in 6, maybe 5 now. I don't know. That's how good I feel. Lots to get into. Biggest turning point for the Wolves, where everything kind of went south in that second half. A huge preview of game 2, what adjustments need to be made in a hurry. But first, quick reminder, tonight's episode brought to us by Monarch Money. Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. All right, quick little recap, I suppose. T-Wolves start out hot, by the way. 8-0 lead. Quiets the crowd. But boy, I'm sitting here right now. Does that feel like forever ago? Wolves up 4 at halftime. Should have been more, if we're being honest. Kind of fell apart those last 2-3 possessions. But nonetheless, it was the second half meltdown, right? OKC, a 10-0 run. They go up 6 all of a sudden. And it was like from that point on, the Wolves were just trying to keep up. Ice cold bench night tonight. DDV 7 for 36 shooting. Putrid. Jaden, Rudy, and Conley, even they only combined for 16 points tonight, and it just became kind of this: can Ant and Julius put the team on their back? And tonight in game 1, the answer was no. 114-88. That's your final. How we feeling? Big picture, right? A lot more basketball to be played. You kind of just touched on a few positives there with the corner 3 You fell apart in the second half. Your bench couldn't play any worse, really. You're down 1-0 in this 7-game series. But the good news is game 2 starts back up at 0-0.
Yeah, I think big picture, I was feeling really good about the Timberwolves' emotional state through the first probably 29, 30 minutes of this game. I thought that there were, obviously I'm not going to sit here and talk about the officials. The one thing I will say is, Timberwolves Twitter is going to complain about the refs, but it seemed like everybody across every corner of the internet was frustrated with how the game was officiated, and I'll leave it at that. But I think the fact that Anthony Edwards especially obviously got teed up in the first half. It's his first tech of the season, or of the postseason, I should say. I just thought that Anthony Edwards especially let the officiating check him out of the game. I think, RP put it very, very well there. I think that Ant, more than anyone, was getting upset with the way that Shea was being officiated, and Ant looked like he just didn't want to play in the second half. And big picture, I think he's got to be more mentally tough than that. And I don't think Ant was very mentally tough in this game. And big picture, that's a huge problem. And the good news is that Anthony Edwards has largely done a very good job of responding to areas of the game in which he hasn't had a good showing, doing so, building and doing better on that in the next game. So I would expect that will be an attention that Ant will have to focus on. But for the Wolves at large, big picture, I think that they've got to be pretty pleased with a lot of the shots that they were able to generate from three. I thought they generated a ton of really good shots. And I think for the most part, they showed that if you can force Oklahoma City to play in the half court, that things are going to work out pretty well for them defensively. I thought what they did in the first half of this game was very good. And I think that OKC had a great adjustment in that second half to have Jalen Williams initiate more of the offense, to get SGA off the ball. And, the Wolves did a good job for the most part of forcing Jalen Williams to take some tough shots. And the unfortunate part for the Wolves is they just weren't able to come out of the gates in the third quarter and take advantage of that and make shots on the other end of the floor. So I don't think that Jaden McDaniels is going to foul out of a game for the rest of the series. I don't think that some of the calls that SGA was getting, they're going to let him continue to get for the rest of the series. And so if that ends up being the case, I was generally pleased with the Wolves' half court defense. So I think that's something that we'll get into, obviously, but there's a few things for them here and there to clean up. And I think this game was a lot closer than the scoreboard would indicate. But, I just think the most important thing is that you just can't overreact. And I don't think the Timberwolves are going to overreact. I don't think Chris Finch is going to do that. That's just not who he is. So we'll see what happens.
Time to reveal where the game was won or lost. It's the turning point.
Again, Wolves lead by 4 going into the locker room. Again, honestly, probably should have been 6, 7, 8, whatever. But then comes the second half. They just, I don't know, you tell me, they just kind of run out of answers. Nobody could hit a shot when they had those open looks, those open corner 3 shots that you were talking about. So you tell us, I guess, biggest turning point in this one was when and why? Like, when did things go too far south for the Wolves to overcome?
Yeah, so you just got to go to the middle of the third quarter. Oklahoma City goes on a 20-6 run for the final 7 minutes of the third quarter. And the Timberwolves made just 2 of their 12 shots. They were 1 of 8 from 3. They took a ton of shots really early in the shot clock with very little movement, and just fed OKC kind of getting out and running in transition and getting more comfortable getting into the half court and scoring on some early offense. So I thought that was super telling. And I think that also kind of coincided with Chet Holmgren coming out of the game. I think offensively, for the most part tonight, outside of the early part of the fourth quarter, in which Holmgren was very strong. I think had 9 very quick points there, was active on the glass and cutting from the corners. But, OKC just went really small and spread the Wolves out and did a great job of moving the ball and knocking down shots. And for the Wolves, they just weren't able to connect on that. And I think what was unfortunate too is that also kind of coincided with Jaden McDaniels starting to get into foul trouble, which was unfortunate. I thought that the second foul that he got called for there. His fourth foul was pretty crazy, and that's when I think the Wolves started to let go of the rope emotionally, and it all just kind of unraveled from there. And I think you got to give Oklahoma City credit in that I totally think that they sensed that the Wolves were getting frustrated with just the general state of affairs, and there's no team in the league that is better, especially at home, at turning kind of those emotional I don't know what the best word to describe it is, just kind of the tough times, I guess, that the team is having emotionally, and just kind of weaponizing that as like a match that just starts an explosive outburst from them on the offensive end of the floor. And that's certainly what happened. And the Wolves just can't afford to do that on the road in Oklahoma City. And I think that's why they controlled the first 2.5 quarters of this game, is because they were really rock solid emotionally. And it felt like every single time that Oklahoma City wanted to go on a little run, or they got a favorable call, the Wolves just kept playing through it, and they were able to make some timely shots. And they just didn't have that in the second half of this game. And so that's, to me, where it totally turned. And I think, that's why we kind of talked about some of the good things off the bat, is that, outside of that run, is a pretty even game throughout. And I think the Wolves just need to keep holding on to that rope and not let Oklahoma City get the crowd into it, and just go on those huge runs that we've become so accustomed to seeing from them all season.
Yeah, well said there. Good breakdown. Plenty more deep dive in this one. More on the 3-point shooting / paint point discussion. Plus the Wolves kind of half-court defense, the impact that had on the first half, second half, and what it's going to look like, I guess, moving forward as well in game 2. But that's all coming up right after this. Quick reminder, tonight's episode brought to us by Monarch Money. Ever go check your bank account and wonder, where did my money go? Dining out, online shopping, entertainment. So easy to lose track, isn't it? Well, that's where Monarch Money comes in. Your own personal CFO. Monarch Money gives you full visibility and control over your own finances. Monarch Money, it's not just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, your investments, your spending, all in one place. So you stop just managing your money, and instead you start building wealth. I know when I started using Monarch Money, I realized how much money I was spending on streaming services, Max, Netflix, Apple TV, Disney Plus, Hulu, you name it. I had it. But now I budget smarter and I save more than ever. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your entire first year. Let me ask you about the we touched on the 3-point shooting. You talked about the open looks from 3 as well. How about the paint stuff? I guess in contrast of that as well. Paint points tonight, 54-20 OKC. Wolves just had 10 paint points through those first 3 quarters. I see in your notes. Just talk to me about what surprised you, I guess. Did you see that kind of coming? Was that on the wall coming into game 1, just knowing OKC and their strengths and weaknesses? And I guess, how do you improve? How do you adjust? We're going to talk about a game 2 preview here in segment 3, but how do you adjust moving forward in this 7-game series?
Yeah, it is surprising, considering that if you look at just rim frequency, percentage of total shots that come at the rim, the Wolves have been number 1 in the playoffs this postseason at 33%. And tonight they were far from that tonight. What were they at the just 14.5%? So less than half of that. I think that obviously there was a very clear directive, and it is part of the Wolves game plan to kind of take advantage of Oklahoma City allowing a ton of threes to be taken, and that, that they play this shell and they don't want to let teams in the paint. But I think the Wolves are such a better 3-point shooting team than the Nuggets are, that they were looking to take advantage of a lot of the open looks that the Nuggets were able to generate, and they just weren't able to do that tonight. I think the Wolves had a 3-point attempt rate of 61.5. So 61.5% of the Wolves' total shots came from 3, which is, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it would not surprise me if that was the Wolves' highest output this season. And, it's unfortunate they shot just 29% on those 51 threes compared to Oklahoma City, had a 3-point attempt rate that was less than half of that. At about a fourth of their shots came from three, but they made they made 52% of them. So you got to give them credit for knocking down the ones that they did generate. And I think for the Wolves, it was just about their inability to get to the rim. Like I said, just 12 shots at the rim compared to Oklahoma City taking 28. Oklahoma City had 15 makes at the rim. So the fact that Oklahoma City shot just 54% at the rim is a great number for the Wolves, right? The average in the postseason so far is about 65%. So they did great. And SGA, it was only 3 of 10 at the rim. And so those are certainly numbers that you can hang your hat on. But Anthony Edwards taking just one shot at the rim, I think is pretty inexcusable. I think, again, it just speaks to the fact that in the second half, it just looked like he didn't really want to play. And he didn't really want to try to put the team on his back and keep them in the game the same way that we've seen him do so many times, especially down the stretch of games 3 and 4 when things really were kind of off the rails offensively for the Timberwolves against the Warriors in the last series. So he's got to be a lot better in that regard. And I thought too that Julius Randle taking just one shot attempt in that in that third quarter after being so good in the first half was a huge problem. And obviously Julius has been a huge reason why the Timberwolves have been so effective at not only getting to the rim, but also finishing when they get there. So that's something that you've got to look at as well if you're the Wolves. But again, I just want to highlight this for a huge reason why the Wolves struggled in the three-point arena, I guess, if you will. I mean, Naz, Dante, Nikhil, 5 of 28 from 3, 18%. And I'd venture to guess that 75 or 80% of those were wide open threes. There just were not a lot of contested looks that they took. Again, shots that you would count as really strong shots. And you compare that to kind of the 4 main guys that were coming off the bench for Oklahoma City, who were 6 of 9 from 3. So yeah, it would not surprise me if those numbers swung wildly in game 2 and you see those guys combined for 40 or 45 points, just considering the quality of looks that they got. And so that's the thing I think the Wolves are going to have to balance is, okay, do we want to try to put the ball in the deck and get in the paint against a team that did a very, very good job of forcing live ball turnovers on the drive? Or do we want to continue to generate a lot of these open 3-point shots and kind of live with the variance? And I think Timberwolves would probably say we'll live with the variance, considering how difficult Oklahoma City made it for the Wolves when they put the ball on the deck. So that's something that's going to be something to follow throughout this entire series. So
the first half and second half, the difference, the contrast, right? I know you already touched on, I guess, the half-court defense, just how good it was. 98th percentile you got in your notes, that half-court defense when it comes to defensive rating. And then the adjustments were made, right? What adjustments really stuck out in that second half that OKC made? You talked about Randall only shooting the one shot in the third quarter. That doesn't help, obviously, but I guess more defensively matching up with OKC's offense. The adjustment OKC made in the second half that stuck out the most. And then what's the counter move? What's the next jab punch that Finch has to come out in game 2 with to counteract that, that adjustment they made that obviously they're just going to keep doing until you can prove that you can stop it.
Yeah, they had Jalen Williams bring the ball up the floor a lot more. And when that happened, SGA obviously starting off the ball, and then SGA would come and get the ball with small-to-small screens or dribble handoffs, not involving big guys. And the Thunder went small when they started to do that as well, in kind of the early mid part of that third quarter. And that's something that's going to maybe result in some more Jalen Clark minutes, because I think that if you're the Wolves and you're going to switch all those small actions, and you're going to have Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels being the 2 guys involved in that and trying to switch those, or maybe, they're going to bring Lou Dort into the play to try to have Mike Conley get a switch onto SGA, whatever the case may be. I think that you might just need to take Rudy Gobert or Julius Randle out of the game for stretches to get Jalen Clark in there as another guy that can be in those switching situations. And so the other thing that I could see the Wolves doing is playing more zone. That was something we saw very, very little of tonight, especially when the Timberwolves went small. That was something that the Timberwolves did quite a lot of. If you remember that game right before the All-Star break, where there was no Randall, there was no Gobert available to the Wolves in that game. And they played 30 possessions of zone in that game and held the Thunder to an 83 defensive rating in those possessions, compared to 72 possessions of man in that game that had an 103 defensive rating, which is still excellent, obviously, but it's just a lot worse than their zone. So, I don't have the numbers in front of me yet of how many possessions of zone the Timberwolves played in this game, but I would venture to guess it was less than 15. And maybe Chris Finch is saving that for, game 2 or something down the line. And it wouldn't surprise me if that's the case, but I think that could be an area where you disrupt more of that small to small switching that the Thunder will try to do. And what they did was they had a 2-3 zone with Jaden McDaniels and Nickeil Alexander-Walker at the top of that 2-3 zone, just kind of swarming SGA and forcing him to get off the ball and have other guys make plays. And so I think that's something too that we'll look to see if Chris Finch will go to more of, is trying to get both of those guys on the floor at the same time, and then have Jalen Clark be the guy that comes in if there's foul trouble, rather than Nickeil Alexander-Walker being the guy that comes in if there's foul trouble. But yeah, I mean, again, like I said, in the first half of this game, the Thunder had a 69.6 offensive rating, which is the second percentile. It's absolutely terrible. The playoff average is 95.3, and they shot just 6 of 26 or 6 of 23 for 26% outside of the rim in the half court in the first half. So the Wolves did a really good job of forcing tough shots. And so you got to credit Oklahoma City for the way they responded in the second half. I mean, their two stars outscored the Timberwolves as a whole, 21-18, and Ant and Julius only had 5 points in that third quarter. And some of those adjustments that Oklahoma City made that got their two stars back into the game after really slow first halves for both of them led them to score 70 points on 62% shooting in the second half. So again, it's just going to come down to which half I think is going to be more representative of what we see throughout the rest of the series. And I think for me, it's less about the shooting for the Wolves and more about how they're able to defend those two guys, because the shooting is going to wax and wane, but your defensive intensity is something that's going to have to sustain for the entire half, and then, or for the entire series. And then following up just on Ant and Julius, I thought that there was a lot of holding the ball and kind of mindless and careless dribbling from those two in the second half, where they lost control of the ball in a lot of one-on-one situations or on the drive that was just
Naj Reed a couple times too, Jaden once or twice, but yeah, those two specifically, you're right. Yeah,
that was a huge bummer, and I think that led to a lot of the turnover scoring differential, right? So Oklahoma City scored 31 points off of Minnesota's 19 turnovers, 1.6 points per turnover, and that was because 13 of Minnesota's 19 turnovers were live ball, meaning that it was a steal for Oklahoma City. And so you contrast that to the Wolves, who scored just 10 points off of 15 Oklahoma City turnovers. That's 0.6 points per turnover.
Only a 4 turnover difference in this game, right? Or was it 5? 19-14?
19-15. But again,
19-15,
there was only a 4 turnover differential overall, but there was an 8 live ball turnover differential. So only a third of Oklahoma City's turnovers were live ball. And that totally impacts, how well you're able to run off those stops. And I think for the Wolves again tonight, 0 fast break points. That they're the first team in the league in this postseason that has not scored any fast break points in a playoff game.
Wow, unbelievable. All right, couple minutes left. Got to talk about Wolves, what they got to clean up and overcome now in game 2 to make this thing a series and tie it up 1 game apiece. You got to steal one in OKC. That's all coming up right after this. Quick reminder, tonight's episode also brought to us by BetterHelp. When your schedule gets packed, work projects, more kids, whatever it may be, it's easy to let your priorities start to slip, right? Even when we know what makes us happy. But when you feel like you got no time for yourself, the non-negotiables like therapy, they become more important than ever. If you've been thinking about starting therapy, it's time to give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, and it's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited for your schedule. So simple. All you got to do, you fill out a brief questionnaire, you get matched up with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Go visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon. You're getting 10% off your very first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, game 2 Thursday, 7:30 tip. I guess after watching what you just witnessed, right? 4 quarters, still small sample, I suppose, but tell me the number one thing in your eyes, you're the coach, that the Wolves need to worry about and kind of adapt and adjust, I guess, moving forward. What do they need to fix? What do they need to focus on and get better at and clean up in a hurry too?
Yeah, I think it's just perimeter contain is the number one thing for me. When the Wolves kept Oklahoma City out of the paint in the first half, which they did pretty much the entirety of the first half, I thought that they did a really good job of closing out those possessions with stops. They had like an 80% defensive rebound rate in the first half, which is excellent. And when you're able to close out stops with rebounds, hopefully be able to get out and run a little bit. I think you just can't have 0 fast break points against a team that's as good in the half court defensively as Oklahoma City. So the more that you can keep Oklahoma City out of the paint, theoretically, the easier it should be to rebound the basketball and be able to run off of stops. And I think the earlier that you can get into your offense, the easier it's going to be for the Wolves to get back to more of what they saw from Ant and Julius in the first half, which was, a lot more decisive play with good attacks, scores, and kickouts that generated a lot of offensive rhythm. I thought even though the Wolves only scored like 48 points in that first half, I thought they generally played with a very good rhythm offensively. And, again, you'll just chalk up the missed shots to be missed shots, right? But again, I think that's what they got to get back to, and they saw it. And I think being more willing to junk up the game with some zone in the half court, it is certainly going to be something that I look to, especially considering that Rudy Gobert did not play all that much in this game. Obviously, he missed time with foul trouble in the first half, but 21 minutes tonight. Even if Rudy hadn't been in foul trouble, I think he probably would have only played maybe 25 minutes in this game. And so
Two
if the
quick
Wolves
fouls in the first 2 minutes, that doesn't help.
Yeah.
Not fun, right?
Yeah. So if the Wolves are going to play smaller, I just think that, you've got to be able to junk the game up at different points. And I just, for as good as Naz Reid was defensively tonight, I thought he was really good protecting the rim and did a good job of walling up on some drives, and was a really good rebounder tonight. Had 8 boards for the Wolves. I think that, I don't know that the Wolves can bank on that given how poorly he played defensively at times in the Lakers series and in the last series against Golden State. So that'll be kind of something that I look to as we.
How about a little bit more Jalen Clark?
How
How about some more Jalen Clark? And if the answer is yes to that, what's the role? I mean, are you putting him on SGA, or what's the game plan there?
For sure. Yep. I mean, that's what you'd bring him in for. Is you'd bring him in for those small to small switching situations against SGA. And I thought Jalen Clark was really good in the 6 minutes that he played. He came in the game, had 3 quick offensive rebounds. One of them was a foul, so it didn't count statistically, but was outscoring, was counterparts on the bench for different points. And I just think, Jalen Clark is a guy who's not going to try to do too much. I think that there were different points at this game where I thought that Dante and Nikhil and Naz all tried to do too much at different points offensively. And, I want them to play with confidence. I want them to be empowered to be contributors on the offensive end of the floor. But I think you also got to have some self-awareness of like, okay, it's not my time right now. I've got to try to, just make a quick decision and move off the ball or drive and kick rather than drive and take a contested layup on Chet Holmgren or take the 5th 3 in a row when I've missed the last 4, and maybe I can pass this one up for a more open shot for another teammate. And I just think Jalen Clark's the type of guy that's going to make those kinds of plays rather than look for his own offense. And I think he largely plays within the flow offensively. And if he can do that while bringing the excellence that we've become accustomed to from him on the defensive end of the floor, and he's shown it too against SGA that so far this season. I think that's a button that Chris Finch should be willing to press. And I would also like to see Chris Finch be willing to press the TJ Shannon button too, if Nikhil continues to not play very well, because he's a one-man fast break. And he showed that he, his best game of the year came against Oklahoma City in that game that I referenced earlier, that game right before the All-Star break. So I think, again, for as much as I love Dante, as much as I love Nikhil, and they've been, awesome players for the Timberwolves for the majority of this season, and they've been consistent, which is what you want. I do think that, at a certain point, like we've been playing in the postseason for a month now, and they just haven't gotten consistent contributions offensively from those guys. I would love to see what Jalen Clark and TJ Shannon can bring you, even if it's for short spurts, right? Even if it's for a 5-minute stretch here or there. I don't think that those guys are for TJ. I don't think that TJ is a defensive liability. I think he's a great rebounder, and he's going to push with pace if he rebounds. And Jalen Clark, I just don't think he's the liability offensively to a point where you can't play him. And again, we'll see. Chris Finch really stands by his guys and rides with his guys. But you look at Mark Daigneault tonight, played 10 guys. And you look at, he pressed the Kenrich Williams button in that third quarter when they went small. And that's a guy who did not really play for them at all in the last series. But he came in tonight. He had a spot where it made a lot of sense for him to play, and he was tremendous in those minutes he played. Made a couple of threes and helped Oklahoma City balloon that from a 6-0 run to a 17-2 run or whatever it ended up being. So I'd like to see Chris Finch expand the rotation a little bit more, but I'm doubtful that happens, at least to the point where TJ Shannon's playing. Maybe we see more Jalen Clark though.
Last one before we get out of here. Knicks Pacers, 30 seconds. Who do you want to win? Who do you think's going to win? Knicks right now -155 to win the series. That makes the Pacers +130 underdogs. So not actually as big of favorites as I thought the Knicks would be. Nonetheless, obviously still tough to go in for right now versus the New York Knicks and Jalen Brunson.
Yeah, selfishly, I want the Knicks to win because I have a lot of friends that are out in New York from college. So I'd love to see the Wolves and the Knicks face off in the finals, get out there and see some of my friends. But I think the Knicks will win this series in 5 games. I think they're a way more physical team. I think they've kind of figured out the Towns and Robinson front court. Been tremendous defensively in those spurts. And I think that Mikal Bridges and Karl Anthony Towns have some really favorable offensive matchups that I think will just be difficult for Indiana to replicate. I think that New York has more guys that can slow down Tyrese Halliburton, and Indiana has guys that'll be able to slow down New York's big three. And so I think that's gonna win out. And these games have been super physical in the playoffs for the most part. And generally, the more physical team has been the team that's won games in the postseason, and certainly that's won series. And I think New York will do that at a better job than Indiana, but we'll see.
T-Wolves fall apart in the second half tonight. The bench turned ice cold. No fast break points. Points off turnovers was a killer as well. 114-88. That's your final in game one. As always, though, huge shout out to all you guys, all the everydayers out there that always make us your first listen. Plus, all you guys coming in the chat with us from game to game. Make sure you like and subscribe if you haven't already. Go follow Jack, too, at JRBorman13. We'll catch you game 2 Thursday, 7:30 p.m. tip. But until then, signing out.